Ayanokoji challenging the student council president, a highly anticipated sports festival, and a traitor hidden among Class D. Let's get into it. It's time for the second semester to begin, and Chabashira-sensei informs them of the upcoming sports festival. Classes A and D will form the red team, while classes B and C will form the white team. These teams will include all 3 grade levels and requires each and every student to participate. She explains that performing well will increase your personal points, and that performing poorly will decrease your personal points, decrease your class points, and even harm your test scores. Lastly, they are told that the MVP for each grade level will receive 100,000 bonus points and that each class must create a participation roster ahead of time. Sudo immediately snaps into action, stating that he will participate in every single event, and Horikita, surprisingly, is on board with this idea. They are then moved into the gymnasium where they have the opportunity to mingle with the other classes. Harada takes some time to exchange some kind words with Katsuragi, while Ryun, on the other hand, argues with Ichino's before leaving. Ayanokoji then notices a petite, frail girl holding a cane named Sakayanagi. She turns out to be the second leader of Class A, who openly opposes Katsuragi. Horikita then asks Ayanokoji what is the secret behind this test, but he simply says, "The faculty hasn't once referred to this as a test." Now it's after class that same evening that we witness Ayanokoji pull out his phone and listen to a certain audio recording. Then while on his way home, Chabashira-sensei once again threatens him with expulsion. The very next day, Class D has a meeting to discuss their strategy for the sports festival. Horikita and Sudo believe that they should focus on a class victory, which will come at the expense of the less athletic students. Karuizawa speaks out against this idea, and Kushida says they should find a middle ground. Horikita proudly explains that her plan is to have the winners of the sports festival share their personal points with the losers in order to supplement their penalty for losing. However, Karuizawa still objects, stating that everyone deserves a chance to win points. Eventually, it comes down to a vote, resulting in Horikita's plan being chosen. After class, Ayanokoji finds Karuizawa waiting for him, and she asks why he told her to disagree with Horikita. He refuses to answer and states that Class D might have a traitor among them. Now, an unknown amount of time later, we find Class D training for the sports festival. They are currently testing grip strength, and Ayanokoji asks Sudo what the average high school student would score. He says 60-ish, prompting Ayanokoji, who has done this many times before, to score a perfect 60. It's not until the test is over that he realizes Sudo was very wrong, which caused him to be recorded as the second strongest in the class. Harada uses these results to begin creating the class roster, and everyone agrees to keep the roster a secret from the other classes. It's during another practice that we see Sudo call Horikita by her first name. She immediately shuts him down, but agrees to let him use her first name if he is crowned MVP of the first years. This of course fires him up, and he actually becomes Class D's leader for the sports festival. A few moments go by, and Ayanokoji then notices Horikita performing poorly in the 3-legged race, so he goes over to offer some advice. He tells her that she needs to slow down to match her partner's speed, but she snaps back, stating that they should just go faster. He then tells her to practice with him, and he purposely goes faster than she can handle in order to teach her a lesson. Now, there's only 2 weeks left until the sports festival, so Ayanokoji invites Kushida and Horikita to help him scout their opponents. They both agree to meet up the following morning, and Ayanokoji walks home with Horikita. He asks her if she has figured out how Ryun discovered Kushida to be the VIP of the cruise ship. She still has no idea, and Ayanokoji mentions that Kushida might have told him herself. Horikita believes this to be completely illogical, and Ayanokoji tells her to figure out the truth tomorrow. The 3 of them meet up the following morning and make their way to the soccer field in order to determine which students they need to be wary of. Horikita bluntly asks Kushida if she actually wants to reach Class A. Of course she says yes, and Ayanokoji walks away, leaving them alone. Now at this point, Class D just finalized its roster when Horikita asks to make a change so that she can be the anchor of the mixed relay. Pseudo really doesn't like this idea, but he gives in after hearing that she just wants to run alongside her older brother. It's finally time for the sports festival to begin, and Pseudo takes first place in the 100-meter dash, all the while Koenji is absent. They find him at the first aid station feeling a bit under the weather, as Hirata tries his best to calm Pseudo down. It doesn't work. Pseudo throws a punch, which Koenji beautifully catches without even turning to look at him. A few events go by and we come to the first big team event. The boys capture the flag. This is a 3-round event which has Class D beginning on offense with Class A on defense. This is actually Ayanokoji's very first time playing Capture the Flag, and he watches Pseudo barrel straight through Class B's defense. However, he turns around to see Yamada from Class C capture the red team's flag. During the second round, Class D switches to defense as Class C charges toward them. Pseudo tries to rally his allies, but is knocked to the ground as Ryun purposely stomps down on his back, twice. After claiming victory, Ryun apologizes, stating that the stomps were a complete accident, but all this does is piss off Pseudo even more. Moving on, we have the tug-of-war where some Class A students openly disobey Katsuragi. The competition begins and red team sweeps the first round, followed by white team sweeping the second. The third round, however, is a hard-fought battle which is currently at a stalemate, when suddenly Ryun lets go of the rope, causing everyone else to tumble to the ground. This only pisses off Pseudo even more, and Katsuragi steps in, preventing Pseudo from confronting Ryun. We then watch Ayanokoji purposely earn an uneventful third place during his obstacle course race. And now it's time for Horikita's turn, and she races through the obstacles in a neck-and-neck battle versus Class C. For some reason, Horikita looks backwards multiple times before colliding with Kinoshita. Due to this fall, Horikita gets 7th place and limps back to camp, explaining that Kinoshita was calling her name during the race. The next noteworthy event is the women's cavalry battle where the red team loses due to a mixture of Class C purposely ganging up on Horikita and Class A just refusing to help. We then watch the guys' cavalry battle where Ayanokoji and Pseudo are working with Hirata. The boys' red team forms one cohesive wall and begins closing in on the white team. Pseudo leads the charge straight through the enemy's forces, and it winds up becoming a 3 versus 1. However, Ryun begins talking shit, successfully provoking Pseudo. Hirata collides with Ryun and successfully grabs his headband, but his hand slips off. Hirata retreats before attacking a second time, but once again he can't get a grip on the headband and winds up getting taken out. Ryun then takes out the other 2 jockeys as they realize that he covered his headband in some kind of oil. A very pissed off Pseudo accuses Ryun of cheating, but he denies it, claiming that it had to just be his normal hair gel. Pseudo then begins stomping towards Class C, and Hirata steps in front of him, blocking his path. After a short debate, Pseudo hits Hirata across the face, knocking him down. Chabashira promptly arrives, asking if there was a fight, and Hirata answers with,
"No, I just tripped."
Pseudo then glances towards Horikita before walking off the field. It's around this time that a 50-minute break is announced, so Ayanokoji asks Horikita about Pseudo. She says that she's too busy with her own injury to be worrying about others. Ayanokoji then calls her useless, pointing out that she's allowed herself to get injured and that she's allowed Class D's greatest asset to just walk away. He ends by asking her if she even realizes the opportunity standing right in front of her. A thoroughly ticked off Horikita then heads to the nurse's office, where she is unexpectedly greeted by Kushida and Chabashira-sensei. Apparently, Kinoshita, the girl Horikita collided with, is claiming that Horikita purposely injured her, and she even has video proof of Horikita frequently looking backward at her during the obstacle course. Ryun then enters the room, saying that he is willing to overlook this incident for the low price of 1 million points. However, Horikita refuses. He then threatens to involve the president, causing Horikita to agree to the 1 million points. However, Ryun now adds that he needs Horikita to beg from her knees. She leaves the nurse's office and begins searching for Pseudo, but winds up bumping into her brother, who she shamefully runs away from. Eventually, Horikita finds Sudo in the dorms and begins persuading him to return to the sports festival. She realizes and tells him that they have a lot in common, as they are both loners seeking the approval of their peers. Sudo gets angry and tells her to just go away, but she refuses to return without him. He then enters into the elevator and heads upstairs to his room. During all of this, the boys have lost the 4-way tug-of-war, and Class D now needs to make 2 substitutes for the mixed 3-legged race. Surprisingly, Ayanokoji volunteers, so Kushida begins tying their legs together. As soon as she finishes, Ayanokoji states that he saw her take a photo of the roster, and asks what she got in return for betraying Class D. Her friendly smile fades away for just a moment, as she proclaims that she will have Horikita expelled, and that she just added Ayanokoji to that list. Roughly an hour has gone by when Sudo steps out of the elevator to find Horikita still patiently waiting for him. She extends her hand, asking Sudo to lend her his strength, and in return, she will watch over him and help him graduate. Together, they return to the sports festival and apologize to their classmates just before the start of the final event. Due to Horikita and Miyake's injury, Ayanokoji now finds himself as the anchor for the relay. Sudo is the first leg and acquires Class D a significant lead, but the others are falling behind. While waiting his turn, Ayanokoji overhears Nagamo telling the president that he plans to make some big changes next year. Ayanokoji then looks the president in the eye and asks him if he would like to learn about his true self. The president receives his baton and just stands there waiting. Then as Kushida closes in, Ayanokoji says, "You better get serious." Both boys bolt down the track, quickly gaining on their opponents. The entire school is standing on their tiptoes, hypnotized by this neck-and-neck race. When suddenly, another athlete trips, forcing Ayanokoji to slow down to avoid a collision. The sports festival ends with Red Team as the victors. However, due to the scoring system, every class ended up losing points. The school then announces the VIPs, which turns out to be Shibata for the first years. Sudo hangs his head as Horikita punishes him by forbidding him from ever using unjustified violence again. She then states that her punishment for performing poorly will be to allow Sudo to call her by her first name. Later that evening, it finally comes time for Horikita to face Ryun. She immediately tells Kushida to drop the act, as she remembers her from middle school. Kushida walks over to Ryun's side as she explains that she must eliminate anyone who knows about her past. Ryun then admits to targeting Horikita and even entering Kinoshita himself. Horikita suddenly reveals that she has been recording this entire conversation, and threatens to edit it in such a way to prove her innocence. Ryun then whips out his phone, showing that he's been video recording this as well, essentially negating her threat. She then admits defeat and begins kneeling to the ground, when Ryun receives a message. It's from an unknown source and contains an audio file of Ryun explaining his plan to take out Horikita to Class C. Ryun begins laughing with genuine joy after realizing someone has bested him at his own game. Elsewhere on campus, we find Ayanokoji being escorted to a private area by a Class A girl. Sakaya Nagi then reveals herself just as Ayanokoji sends a certain text message to Ryun. She states that it's been exactly 8 years and 243 days since she last saw him. However, Ayanokoji has no idea who she is. She mentions the White Room, causing him to panic, but she then says that she doesn't plan to tell anyone about his past. She then proclaims that she has the power to bury so-called geniuses, which is exactly what he wants to happen in order to prove his father wrong.